name is Anat Admati, and I am here today with Peter Goodman, who is the global economic correspondent for the New York Times. He's written a number of books, and today he was here at Stanford talking about one of them, and another one is coming up soon, which we talked about a little bit as well. The book we mostly discussed and was the subject of the event is called Davos Men, How the Billionaires Devoured the World. And what we're recording right now is part of our series that kind of flips around the truth to power concept to make it about giving truth power. So to give truth more power, you first have to uncover truth, and journalists are often in the business of telling us what the truth is. And so the question I would start asking you about or discussing with you is, what is the truth about Davos, and who are the Davos men, and what is society potentially missing about what's happening in Davos?
So I think the truth about Davos is unfortunately much less titillating than some people would like. I mean, there's so many conspiracy theories around Davos, like it's some sort of secret government. The truth is that it's this elaborate performance. And most of the stuff that we see from the outside, or even from the inside, if we go there, doesn't matter very much. There's conferences about every conceivable subject you might be interested in, and lots of very thoughtful and intelligent people you can interact with. But the people who really matter the most there are the people who pay for it. And those are the CEOs of technology and finance companies, heads of state, I mean, the richest, most powerful people in the world. And the truth is, they don't engage in any of that stuff. They don't go to seminars on the future of corporate governance, or how to deal with climate change or the challenges of migration. They sit in private rooms and they do deals with one another.
So the truth is, and I was in Davos twice, and what you say is also what I observed. I was part of the entertainment as an academic. I wasn't there to be on a panel and then maybe go to a couple of other meetings that are more private, but none of the I may have had one bilateral meeting maybe, or I organized my own in some of the lounges, but basically I could go to the sessions, so people like me would populate some of these sessions, but what I knew was the maze of the bilateral meetings, as well as the front, the storefront of every place in town that became the storefront of big corporations.
And don't get me wrong, people like me could then run into people like you, and I could actually learn something about financial regulation. And I have learned a great deal from lots of intelligent people who are influential at Davos over the years, but we shouldn't delude ourselves. The real stuff is happening where we can't see it.
And, it's the billionaires that pay for it, but then they invite all these policymakers and all these government people. We flashed today pictures, Bill Clinton, we discussed some of the other policymakers, government people who go there and who thrive on, love going there.
Right.
And so how would you characterize that what kind of a relationship do they develop over there?
It's a cozy relationship. I mean, one of the pitfalls for any journalist who's paying attention is you have to constantly ask yourself, who am I interacting with? And how many people am I talking to on a regular basis whose job description does not include talking to people like me? Because, as a beat reporter, I am cognizant of the fact that I can, in moments, I can find somebody who works for a bank, who works for a lobbying organization, who is eager to take my call, who is happy to walk me through the minutia of whatever thing it is I'm trying to understand. And some of those people are really good at their jobs and very decent people, and they will actually help me with history and background. But of course they have an agenda. And that agenda is to maybe even subconsciously just convey a kind of worldview that reflects the interests of the people paying them to spend time with me. And so I have to very consciously look to find people who have different perspectives, who maybe aren't so easy to reach, to go out into the field and talk to ordinary people who don't even understand why some journalist is interested in their story, and connect that to the bigger questions of policy. And I think the danger for people who spend their time, just going from places like the Aspen Ideas Festival to Davos to the Munich Security Conference to a million other, smaller events around the world, is that there is this kind of self-reinforcing bubble, and there's a kind of decorum, where it's like impolite almost. That's really what happens is for a journalist, or I assume for an academic, it's similar, to then do what we really ought to be doing, which is thinking critically and maybe taking on ideas, or even just asking, well, how do you know that exactly? And have you talked to enough people to be confident of your own view? And yet that puts you in this position where yeah, you're impolite. It's awkward.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that's part of our job, but not everybody does it that way.
So exactly. So I think that exactly as you said, and I know this and notice it myself in my own profession, academics, it's sort of, you want to belong to the club. You don't want to challenge people with power. And, in the book that I wrote that just came out again, the last chapter has an epigraph and a discussion about power.
Right.
And about the enablers of what happens. And in the epigraph, we quote an economist who lived in the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, who said essentially that, our everyday in the economy is sort of a power struggle, and that the people who win have very sophisticated and brutal ways to gain power. All along, the sentence continues, telling everybody that their struggle is a struggle for everybody. So
right.
That goes to the narrative of this sort of winner takes all type narrative, which is, whatever the problems are of this world, we are not the ones that cause them. In fact,
right.
We're here to help.
The central artifice of Davos is, if you're there, then you're a participant in progress, because, the official mantra, and you see it on banners all over Davos, committed to improving the state of the world. So in my book, I tell the story of this gathering of pharmaceutical executives. And I think it was 2017. And at the time, there were a lot of stories of tremendous price gouging. People like Martin Shkreli, who went to prison, get hold of intellectual property. They get a drug that's vitally important to some group of people. They jack up the price, 4,000%. And so you have this group of pharmaceutical executives, and they're all being asked, like, well, what's the solution? Why is this happening? And it's always about, like, well, we haven't settled on the right model. The messaging isn't, with this assumption, it's implicit that, of course, we're very concerned about this, and never, well, actually, it's our job to do the thing that we're defining as the problem. And the better we are at it, the more the stock price goes up, the more we get paid. But that would be really impolite to say at Davos.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the entire posture of the place is, we have sincere discussions. Problems in the world are never our fault. We are the good guys trying to solve all the problems.
It's never power. It's always like a misunderstanding, or, we haven't settled on the right model. There was this wonderful moment that you probably remember. I think it was like 2018. Rutger Bregman, who's a Dutch anthropologist, was invited to a panel on universal basic income. And he said something that was deemed so impolite that it went viral on YouTube. He was asked about taxes, and he said, nobody here is paying taxes. That's the real solution, but no one will talk about that. I feel like I'm at a firefighters conference, and you're not allowed to talk about water. And the interesting thing is that part went viral, and this may be familiar to people, saw it on Twitter or wherever. The part that people didn't pay attention to, but that I happened to watch for my book, was that then the moderator, who's this guy who's working for Time Magazine, then owned by Mark Benioff, one of the characters in my book, turns to Jane Goodall, the naturalist, and says, what is it about us as a species that we know the solutions, but we somehow can't implement them? As if, like, oh yes, this is like a biological problem. It's not that the people in the room have rigged the system so that they don't have to pay taxes. It's something, more philosophical than that.
Yeah, so a lot of it is about narratives and framing it as like, or just sort of shifting your attention away from that and sort of telling you, look over there, and we're good people,
Right.
and we're gonna, try to think about it all.
We all mean well.
We mean
We're all
well.
friends.
We're all friends, yeah. So there is that, and in the book also you discuss the truth of what the organization is that is
Right.
behind it, the people on top of it, which is always just the sausage making is always one of those things that we don't look at, when we eat a sausage. How is it that these people came there? What is it that brings them there? Who's paying for all this stuff? All of those things. You now have a book about supply chains.
Right.
So what's the truth over there?
The truth of the supply chain crisis, it's called How the World Ran Out of Everything Inside the Global Supply Chain. It looks at how we ran out of lots of things during the worst disruptions of the pandemic, although a lot of these shortages are continuing. It's one of the reasons why we have an affordable housing crisis in the U.S. is because it's so hard to build, and one of the reasons it's so hard to build is people are still waiting for basic things like doorknobs, shades of paint, plywood is still difficult to procure. So there are many components to this, but the most important one, I think, is that we've just mistreated labor so systematically over the years that lots of really important positions, people working in warehouses, people driving trucks, these jobs have been so devalued that once people have the ability to get some other job, or if there's a shock to the system like a pandemic, they just stay home. We've also had tremendous concentrations in markets, monopoly power, greater than the robber barons. I mean, the four largest meat packing companies in the United States control 85% of the market for meat. I mean, the robber barons never got quite that high. And then we really overdid it with so-called just-in-time delivery, where which began as a really sensible idea.
Efficiency.
Toyota came up with this idea post World War II Japan.
We're teaching in the business school.
Sure, and it's a good idea if done sensibly with lots of other things. The idea that instead of just doing what Henry Ford did at the beginning of mass assembly, you just make as much stuff as you possibly can. You figure out how to sell it later. Well, Japan post World War II, very constrained in terms of capital. They don't have that much space. Let's make just as much as we need to replace what we already sold. Well, consultancies like McKinsey and the whole logic of financialization comes along. And suddenly consultants are telling executives of companies, how you can make your stock price go up? You can jack up your return on assets. You reduce your assets by cutting inventory. So instead of spending all this money to keep parts in a warehouse as a hedge against some problem, just close your warehouse, rely on the web,
edge,
container shipping, and then take the extra money, give it to yourself through executive compensation, give it to the shareholder through dividends and share buybacks. And, that works great until it doesn't.
Right. So you just live more on the edge, and then you're unprepared for a pandemic, and people, people to do the jobs and all these things.
I got this great quote from a guy at the City University of London who said, "Yeah, it's a great way to increase your return on assets. So if Wall Street wants return on asset as the metric that's obsessed with, yeah, you cut your inventory, you reduced the denominator. That's great." He said, problem is once you need a ventilator in the middle of a pandemic, you can't say, "Oh, but our share price is really high."
Yeah. The share price is not going to do what we need when we need.
Share price doesn't protect a doctor going to deal with a COVID patient who doesn't have a mask.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of narratives and a lot of need for people to actually take them on and explain what's really going on against the sort of narratives that people want to tell you, because it makes them feel good and worthy. And they'd rather you think that too.
And it's a prophylactic against change, because to the extent to which people see billionaires as, not just success stories to emulate, like that's deep in probably every culture, but especially American culture. Like, well, that person managed to amass this fortune. They must be a genius. I'd like to live in a beautiful house like that. Who wouldn't want to fly on a private jet if they could? But that's not enough for these guys. These guys would have us believe that they have our interests at heart. And that's really this way of saying, you don't have to regulate us. You don't have to tax us. You don't have to stick us with emission standards. Leave it to us. We'll go to Davos. We'll all get together. We'll drink some wine, and life will be good, and we'll all benefit from progress because all of our interests are the same, right?
Right. So there is that narrative that, we're all in this together, and the people who are kind of wise and successful and rich will hang out with some of the government people, and together they'll figure it all out and then develop these cozy relationships that you said. So the question is, how do we encourage, skepticism, or how do we educate people about truth so that we give more power to truth? I mean, that is where the challenge is for people who do ask these questions and who do uncover truth. Do they actually say it, and do they actually try to get the message kind of correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the question of our time. But I mean, for journalists, we have to hold the powerful to account. We have to square their public statements with their actions. We have to follow the money. We have to show how ordinary people are affected by policies and by the activities of the people who control the money.
Yeah, well, but some of this, so, we both can look at our own sectors of the economy to ask what can go wrong with that, like how the media can become part of the problem. And in my case, how academia can become part of the problem, which I've already had one discussion with a fellow academic about, Luigi Zingales. Are we also susceptible to some kind of
Sure.
capture, wanting to belong to certain clubs, wanting to cozy up to for whatever data or honor or going to Davos could be?
Sure. I mean, look, Davos, man, by which I mean this tribe of super wealthy people who are, so loyal to their own interests that national interests are pale in comparison, and again present themselves as the good guys. This is a definition I've sort of borrowed and changed from Samuel Huntington, who coined it in 2004. They're not going to disarm, unilaterally, and they're very sophisticated, and they can hire legions of communications people, public relations people, who can insinuate this narrative into the discourse. And the worst part is they internalize it themselves. And I mean, I'm convinced from hanging out with these guys that they really believe it. So you spend time with people like, Larry Fink, who runs BlackRock, the world's largest asset management company. And there really is this kind of binary of like, you can have me, you've got my knowledge of the capital market, you've got my technical, my technology that's looking like a hawk for crises out there. And yeah, we have, economic inequality, and we have volatility in the markets, and life isn't fair, but this is all part of, the great modern world that we live in. Or you can over-regulate us and then destroy innovation, and then we might as well be diving into dumpsters for our dinner in Venezuela, as if like those are the two options. Yeah. And I do think, I mean, obviously I'm speaking somewhat farcically, but not entirely. I mean, there is
false choices everywhere.
And I think there's a quick reflexive, like we're not nanny state Europeans, Americans love to say, so we don't need guardrails on our economy. We love to pat ourselves on the back for producing Google and Apple, and how come nobody else did that? Well, our problems are part of that. Now, there's some truth to that in terms of our sort of willingness to take risks, but this idea that we're therefore supposed to not have progressive taxation or antitrust enforcement, and we're supposed to just outsource the solution of our problems to a handful of people who aren't even engaging in free market capitalism themselves. They're constantly using the political process to pervert the free market, I mean, there is no free market without rules, right? It's like, I mean, you were saying, earlier, you can't have an NBA basketball game without referees. I mean, that's just how it works.
This analogy to a previous guest, although before we had this series, who visited here, Tariq Fancy from BlackRock,
yeah,
who wrote the Diary of a Sustainable Investor, who who was sort of saying, "Oh, free market, that's a big hoax." It's as crazy to say that the government is intervening in the free market
Sure.
than to say the NBA is intervening in the free game of basketball to put the 3-point line someplace. So no rules, no market.
Right.
And sometimes when, like Donald Trump was saying, "Oh, we'll cut the number of rules." And I'm like, okay, how many rules there are in football? Like a thick book. So what about number of rules?
But honestly, who would invest if there are no rules?
Fair game.
Sure, but look, you could go, I assume, to like parts of Sudan, and you could find yourself a free market if you wanted. You're going to go invest there with no rules and no authority. Like, I mean, you need rules to have confidence.
It becomes about power, raw power. When you don't have the rules, then power rules.
I mean, in your world, the finance people manage to cite confidence and the confidence fairy to fend off regulations. Well, if they really, got their fantasy and there'd be no rules, there'd be no confidence at all because no one would have it and no one would invest.
That's right. So they rely then on the people trusting, the central banks, the governments, so that they can trust them because they have, coddling safety net.
So they want rules, and their rule generally seems to be like, if anything terrible happens, there's a social welfare system for giant companies that are too big to fail. Everybody else gets free market capitalism, right? So the public might say, well, yeah, we agree with rules. We might have the rules be a little different.
Yeah, no, that's what capitalism is, capitalism for the rich, ragged individualism for the poor.
Right.
Exactly. Okay, I think that's a great conversation, and it's fun to have you around.
Thanks for having me.
And I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Absolutely.